Welcome back to Mean Streets, the podcast where we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir and more. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And we are your cinematic sleuths, and it's time to crack another case. But this week we have another cinematic sleuth joining us. We have Sergio Angelini, the host of Tipping My Fedora podcast, with us. Welcome, Sergio.
Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you very much for having me both. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we thought for this particular investigation, let's get, us and another big noir hitter together and tackle a fun film. But Matt, tee us up. What do we got?
Well, it is a fun film. This case is 1944's Murder My Sweet, or Farewell My Lovely, as it was in the UK. Starring Dick Powell, Claire Trevor, and Anne Shirley. Adapted from the novel, of course, by Raymond Chandler, by John Paxton, and directed by Edward Dmytryk.
Murder My Sweet.
Murder My Sweet, Farewell My Lovely. Are we going to decide which one we're calling it?
We'll go with Murder My Sweet. I think it's most commonly known as Murder My Sweet.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Sergio?
I think so. Well, in the circumstances, since we're going to a certain degree, distinguish between the novel and that film version, and then, of course, there's a remake with that version.
Yes.
I think we got to give ourselves a chance not to go completely crazy.
I think you're right.
Version control.
I love it. Yes. All right, let's initial reactions. Sergio, we'll start with you. What was if you can remember, what was your first impression of watching Murder My Sweet?
Mine was, I guess you'd have to say, a little bit compromised. I'm from Italy. So back home, I'm Sergio Angelini. But I first saw Farewell My Lovely, the 1975 version. And I saw that on Super 8 film. I had a projector, a screen, and you used to rent them. So you'd rent the whole film on Super 8 and watch it. So you had a screen, you're there with the whole family. It was actually, Super 8 was actually a very decent format. And I thought it was great. And it was really good. At which point I was already a fan of Chandler, because Chandler for me was kind of the first adult author I read as a kid. I was probably 12, 13. And I think, I guess I'm trying not to be mean about Agatha Christie. I'd read Agatha Christie, but I think I knew when I read Chandler.
It's okay to be mean about Agatha Christie.
Well, I like Agatha Christie, but I don't think I necessarily thought of her as an adult author. I think you can appreciate her without being an adult. Let's put it that way. Yes. Whereas I think as a neophyte teen, I think I was in a situation where when I got to Chandler and then Fleming, around the age of 12, 13, the world looked different. It's a bit like when you discover the opposite sex or, whatever rings your bell. And in terms of adult literature, where you talked about adult things, that was what excited me the most. So I'd read the book, and in actual fact, I didn't see the 1944 version until probably a couple of years later. This would have been on Italian television, so it would have been dubbed. And it was really, really exciting. I remember the opening more than anything. I think everybody always remembers those first two opening scenes, which are so terrific. One of which is, of course, technically the credit sequence, which is that pool of light, because poor Philip Marlowe is getting the third degree. And then this surprising beginning that has nothing to do with the book or any other adaptation, which is they're blindfolded. But which in a way sort of makes it even more important that he explain everything in detail, because he can't point to things and so on and so forth. And then, of course, we start the flashback and we have that fantastic scene in his office. It's night. And all of a sudden there's that pulsating light outside. And all of a sudden this face emerges in the reflection of his office window. And it's so terrific. And it's not that the rest of the film doesn't live up to that, but it's such a brilliant way to get you into the universe of the story. And in such a visual way, having read the book and enjoyed the language and all the wonderful things about Chandler, it was great to see something that genuinely was adapting it for another medium and was giving it some kind of seriousness. And I thought, oh, this is wonderful. Plus, I was well aware that Dick Powell was a musical star from the 1930s. And I just suddenly thought, oh, this is fantastic, even more than I thought it was possible. Because there I was, used to seeing him in the Gold Diggers films and all the other Warner Brothers films from the 30s. And here, totally different kind of characterization, but it's still him. And well, we'll get into that. But, he's terrific in it.
He is. Yeah. He is. Matt.
Very similar. Very, very similar to Sergio. I was, I guess, a bit older, perhaps 14, 15, and I'd gone through the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'd gone through Agatha Christie. I was cutting my noir teeth with Chandler. And as is often the case for regular listeners, I think this was shown on the BBC or late at night one evening, sort of 11 o'clock maybe, and I stayed up to watch it. I remember staying up to watch it in the dark, and like Sergio, hooked from the credits. And there are very few films I can say that about. And again, like Sergio, I just absolutely fascinated by the idea that there was this blindfolded man being questioned by the police, and you didn't know why. He was blindfolded, most importantly, who he was and why he was being grilled by the cops. Whether I'd read the book at this time, because I didn't read the Marlowe books in order. I know that I started with The Lady in the Lake, so I didn't read. Whether I'd read the book at this stage, I can't remember. But I was in this from credits and scene one, and never wavered from it.
Fair enough. Man, when did I first see this? I can't remember. It was, I don't know. I think it might have been during my master's. I stumbled upon this film. It wasn't one that I watched as a kid. And it wasn't one that was ever on my radar of Philip Marlowe films. I for whatever reason, they just never was. And then when I was doing my master's, I came across it and, found it, bought it, watched it, and from that point onwards, it has remained my favorite of the Marlowe adaptations.
Me too.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. There's others that are good, and some that are really good, and some that are really not good. But this one just sort of hit all the right notes for me with what I would want from a Chandler adaptation, and I think Dick Powell goes a long way to making this film the kind of the masterpiece that I think that it is. I think that his performance as Chandler is what I see as maybe as what I call as the iconic Marlowe performance. He is just what I see and what I want from Marlowe. He is the book brought to life for me, and that was kind of my first reaction to watching this film, all those years ago. It swept me up, and I was like, wow, it's very different in places to the book. It's also my favorite book of Chandler's. Murder, Farewell, My Lovely is my favorite of his series. So it's kind of nice that my favorite book of his has my favorite adaptation as well. But it's interesting that there are a lot of differences between the film and the book. Do we want to dive into some of that before we get into the nitty-gritty of the film itself?
I think that makes sense. I mean, in a way,
I think it does.
If we sort of talk about the plot and then how it relates to the book, maybe that sounds sensible, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think so. I mean, there's quite a few. There are quite a few changes. I can sort of, I don't know. I can rattle off a few of what they are, or we can just sort of go through them. But one of the changes is there's the aspect of Marriott. His his character is in the novel is a homosexual. That's kind of gone. A lot of the Amthor and Soderbergh stuff is pulled back quite considerably. The gambling boats is more or less gone entirely from this, and the opening is probably one of the biggest changes, in my opinion, mainly because that opening was such a big opening in the book, where Marlowe goes into the black bar, and then you have Walter Mosley all those years later who inverts that opening scene for Devil in a Blue Dress, and that being changed heavily for the book, from the book into the film, but again, another big one is obviously the character of Anne being quite heavily changed. So which of these do we want to start with?
I don't mind. I think I do. I love the opening of the book. The scene in that bar where and it's a violent opening. Is it changed? Let's start with that one then. Let's start with the opening. Is it changed for any reason other than to tone down the violence?
Yes,
that's my question to you. And for the race issue.
Is there anything left?
Because what happens is pretty much what happens, isn't it? Except
I mean, I agree. Yes, I mean, ultimately it's softened, isn't it? Because he just instead of killing someone or even two people, or the 1.5, let's say, it's really a situation where you're sort of saying, okay, throw somebody over their shoulder, they bump into some furniture, but eventually, they kind of wander off, ultimately unsatisfied. In the book, it's a much more visceral scene. It has a lot more impact, but it also sets up something that pays off later. This idea that because it's a black man who's been killed, it doesn't matter. And what's interesting is the way that with Marlowe, he doesn't comment on that per se, because he's looking at it from the police's point of view in the sense of the comments that he's making, which are a bit wisecracky, but not entirely. I mean, one of the oddities of the book is that, strictly speaking, he's hired by the policeman to investigate. He's helping a cop. I mean, that's never in any of the versions. Again, that's, I think, something that there should be at least one Private Eye movie or one Private Eye novel where one of the interesting things is that the police actually hire him to look into it on the QT. But, that is sort of soft pedal, because the cop that does it is sort of not getting very far. And ultimately we move into a second cop. And that's the sort of thing which, in a movie is going to get compressed. It just isn't going to suit a film. You want to do a miniseries version, you would keep all of that. Absolutely. A nice 3-hour version, super. 95-minute version, not so much. So that's not going to happen. But it feeds into this idea of police corruption. And one of the things that I think, therefore, this reflects is, of course, you had scenes in films from that time which would have been set in a black nightclub, no problem. That could have been done, but it wouldn't have served any obvious purpose except for representation, if you like. You could have had a musical number. You can see how they would have done it. You would have had a nice jazz number there, and that would have been going on for 2 minutes. They're not going to do that, which is kind of great. At the same time, it takes that away, and it's a shame, because in the book it's important, but in natural fact, then I don't want to jump ahead because I think we'll get back to it, but it seems to me that it represents that aspect of it. It's a softening, it's less violent. It doesn't get you into a situation where conceivably maybe they wouldn't have shown the film in the South, which was a problem at the time, let's face it. And it's not a good reason, but it's a real one. And the other thing is the whole subplot about police corruption, which we'll get into. And it's one of it's perhaps the most important thing that's taken out of this adaptation, and resurfaces in the 75 version, but it's not here in the 1944 version. Big surprise.
It's, for me, it's always been one of the few drawbacks of the film. I think for all those reasons that you've said, Sergio, but also because Chandler, he always did such a really good job of making LA feel real in his novels and multicultural. That doesn't mean that he was always necessarily in his writing was kind towards everyone, but in a lot of, I think in a lot of places I would say that he was, but I think changing this also sort of it feels just to me it feels like a code thing, like you said, they want to put it in southern states. They're going to have to change this in order to appease that. And to me, it just feels like a bit of a cheapskate, because it's taking away from the color and the life of Los Angeles at that time, and making it, because we have all these, in our current political climate, particularly in the States, there's this whole concept of, the Make America Great bullshit and all this kind of crap. But then when and they are referring to this particular period, they're referring to this lie that in the 40s and 50s was this glorious heyday of America, when it was a very complex, very segregated, very racist, very tumultuous time, but also very diverse. And modern day America seems to hate diversity. And then when you go back and you watch these films, it's like, it's a shame, because actually the book would have portrayed an authentic America, and the film, for its reasons, stripped a little bit of authenticity that was in the novel. And that's one of my big drawbacks, I think, from the opening being changed, as for me. But I don't know about you, Matt.
Yeah, I can go along with that. Absolutely. I can understand exactly where you're coming from. What it highlights to me is that right now we need a faithful, really, and I mean really faithful adaptation of Farewell, My Lovely for the big screen now, because the climate is right for it. Not, I hasten to add, with Liam Neeson in the title role, but that's a separate episode. It does strip something of it back, but I think we have to be realistic, and it was almost inevitable that it was going to be softened for the time the film was made, for the reasons that Sergio's given. And that there's a lot missing. I agree with you, Luke. There's a lot missing that is part of the authenticity. But it's not really a montage that I do like about Los Angeles being a real place, is that are those exterior shots of Los Angeles. Where Marlowe says, I just realized how big this city was all over again. I love that. I think those opening shots of the real streets are really good and really atmospheric. But it doesn't go anywhere near far enough to bring back the authenticity that you're talking about, quite obviously. But I think it's an itch that you can't scratch because of the code.
I think also you're about 4 or 5 years too early. When you look at something like Crossfire with Robert Mitchum and directed by Edward Dmytryk and made by the same producer, the same writer, Adrian Scott and John Paxton, who had made Murder My Sweet, which is about anti-Semitism within a murder mystery. Things are going to change, and by about 1948, 1949, you've got much better representation of African Americans within other kinds of stories. So it's not long to go, but 1944, there's just no way. There isn't another film you can compare it to simply say, oh, well, they did it there, so why didn't they do it here? It's just, they just weren't going to do it. It wasn't on their radar. It wasn't going to happen. And so I think that you just have to accept that as a reality of making the film in period at the time, which is very different from when you adapt it decades later, but you set it in the past. And it's always interesting because, of course, these were meant to be contemporary stories. And I'm always in two minds, because obviously there are aspects of it that just won't update, because you bump against stuff. So you kind of have to do it, because otherwise it's the usual thing. Okay, you get your phone out and look something up.
Yes.
Kind of, the bane of every writer's existence, I would imagine.
Yes.
So you sort of say, well, no, I had to set it in the 40s or maybe the 50s, but otherwise I can't do it. It won't function. It won't work. And that's just, part of the package. But equally, this idea that then we get this version of, say, The Big Sleep in 1978 with Robert Mitchum set in contemporary London, which is way more faithful than the Bogart version. I mean, in terms of following the book and the plot and the characters, much, much, much closer, and yet infinitely less interesting as a film. So, be careful what you wish for, because I'm not sure it would translate. So I'm just saying.
It's a complicated one. I mean, I agree that in a few years' time, because then you get like 1951, you get the Pool of London. There's definitely a lot more, going on to sort of address social topics and the genre being used on film, film noir being used to address certain topics, which, it does come in time.
Mean Streets will return right after this. Who doesn't love a good boxing movie? Well, Steve Hunt presents the Boxing Movie Podcast. On each episode, Steve and his guests discuss a movie that has boxing as a theme. Do not be put off if you're not a fan of boxing, though. Of course, he covers the likes of Rocky and the sequels, but the depth of boxing-themed movies across cinema history is much greater than you might imagine. Boxing Movie Podcast has covered the early works of Hitchcock, explored the world of blaxploitation cinema and the golden age of film noir, with episodes covering The Setup, Champion, and Stanley Kubrick's Killer's Kiss. You might not have previously considered yourself a boxing movie fan, but after listening to a few episodes of the Boxing Movie Podcast, you may have to reconsider that view. Find the Boxing Movie Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
If you love Mean Streets, join us on Patreon and get exclusive perks, insider access, and a chance to shape the show.
Depending on the tier of your choice, get early episode access, your name in the credits, and have your questions read on air.
You can help us choose films for us to review, unlock exclusive commentaries and reviews, and join our members-only YouTube Live Q&As.
So slip on your trench coats, pull your fedoras down, and join us on Patreon today. It was to come, but I think Sergio's probably right. And I think we get some of it in the 1975 version, don't we? From memory.
We do. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about that version, which I think we're all quite keen on, because it seems to me that they actually, if you watch them in close succession, which I just did, it becomes quite clear the extent to which they are trying to make sure that in making this film in 1975, it's much more reflective of that more varied existence within the LA of, in this case, 1941. And so therefore you get that emphasis on a mixed marriage couple. The Florians is this black bar where white people are not served, and then you even get the whole thing when they discuss the jade. They make sure they go and speak to a person actually from China to discuss Mandarin jade. So you're making sure that these things are being represented in a way that reflects what you can say and do in 1975, which you were just less likely to do in 1944, or if you did, you would do it in this kind of exotic way, which I think now comes across quite often as way more insulting and patronizing, and problematic. So you kind of think, okay, given the alternatives, you know what, I'll take a step back and not complain too much.
I can see that. Other big changes. Are there what other changes stand out to you guys that's for good or bad from the novel?
Well, my big one is the character of Anne and the whole climax of the film. Those are the biggest changes for me. And I don't know. I could probably be persuaded either way on this, but I think the ending of this film is extremely good, and I always get the feeling the gambling boat comes out of nowhere. The gambling boat climax comes out of nowhere, and I sort of think, is it not better for the solution to this mystery to be like where it is in the film rather than on this boat that we don't know anything about until the last third of the book? Like I say, I can be persuaded either way on that. But I think the end, in the context of this film, I think the ending is fantastic. And it's a change for the good, in my eyes. Some of these changes I don't think are necessarily all for the worse. I think some of these are for the better. But those are the two big ones. And the character of Anne, I don't know. Anne's she always strikes me as being a bit too much of a wallflower in comparison to Helen, and a bit too Miss Goody Two Shoes a little bit. But I suppose she's got to be.
It's probably worth explaining a little bit about Anne. So for those listening who maybe haven't seen this or maybe haven't read the book, let's go into a bit more details to who Anne is in the book versus who she is in the novel.
In this,
yeah. Do you want to take that away, Matt?
Yeah, well, Anne in the book is she's the daughter of. I've not read the book in preparation for this, so you can correct me if I get any of this wrong. It's a long time since I've read it. Is she not the daughter of a cop?
Yes.
Yeah,
and a budding journalist.
And she's now a journalist, and she's part of the, as you were saying, Sergio, the subplot about police corruption. And she comes across Marlowe when he's been sapped after the Marriott job. So that's in the film, and she sort of attaches herself to him, but she's not connected to the Grail family as she is in the movie. She's a separate entity of her own, with her own agency and motives and what have you. She's not the jealous, in inverted commas, and bitter stepdaughter character that she's in this. She's of her own making. She's a character in her own right, rather than a sort of adjunct to the principal female role in this. Having said that, I think what the change to the role in the film works for what the film needs her to do. Although
does it?
I think so, doesn't it?
What do you think, Sergio?
I've never had a real problem with Anne. I mean, I think she's like I say, she's just a wallflower to me. She's just a love interest.
In the book, you mean?
In the film.
Yeah, I tell you what, I think the way they adapt her role in the film is kind of a stroke of genius, in the sense that the psychology of her character makes a ton more sense if she's the daughter of Grail and is sort of resentful of the stepmother, not unreasonably. And I think in terms of that dynamic, she's a much more interesting character, and therefore her sticking her nose in and sort of trying to both protect her father, but to a certain extent also have a critical view of what Helen's up to, I think makes a ton more sense, because it works in the book, but it works in the book because it's this additional third element to the plot, which is the police corruption plot. So by eliminating that part of Anne Riordan's character entirely, you then take away the whole subplot about police corruption. Now, that would have been marvelous if they'd kept it, but they were never going to keep it because it's 1944. I mean, you can have somebody like the Laird Krieger character in A Wake Up Screaming, who can be a kind of nutsy cop. Nutsy meaning he's nuts, not that he's a Nazi. But that has to make him a rogue cop. He can't, it's not about how the police are bent. That's not going to happen. And therefore, in 1944, by making this clever change, which I think makes her more integral, it does that thing of condensing the narrative, which they have to do to make it fit. It then also felicitously delivers this required effect of eliminating that whole big subplot, which is important because that's necessary for the whole thing about even the boat aspect of it, because that character is all about the corruption. And so the reason why I think it's powerful in the book is because it's this massive theme. It's actually what gives the novel some of its genuine gravitas and weight, because, you know, he calls it Bay City. It's really Santa Monica. And it was a well-known situation of Santa Monica in the 30s, that it was utterly corrupt. And he's reflecting that reality. And I think handling it in a really interesting way. So you get not one, but two sort of ex-cops that are linked. There's the other guy is the guy who gets him on the boat towards the end, and he used to be a cop as well. And it's this whole thing about that Marlowe, in fact, sort of helps rectify that situation, but equally it's tied in with the Grails because they're so powerful. So Marlowe is able to get an in just by saying, oh, but no, but I've been hired by the Grails. So they just bend over because they're corrupt. And it's a rich family, so they'll do it. But you sweep that completely under the carpet for the movie. So you eliminate all of that. I mean, it's probably worth mentioning that this is a byproduct, although I don't see it as a criticism, of the fact that the original novel is based on these 3 short stories, in some cases really quite loosely. It's not an obvious fix-up. In that sense, you've got, you know, Try the Girl, Mandarin's Jade, and The Man Who Liked Dogs. And essentially, it's those 3 stories in that order. You start off with the story about the equivalent of the Moose Malloy character looking for Velma. You then transition into the one about the missing Jade and the Jules Amthor character, and then eventually you get the lead brunette character, you know, and the boat, which is a small element of The Man Who Liked Dogs. And one of the brilliant aspects of the book, I think, it's why it's such a terrific novel, is the way that it doesn't just amalgamate those 3, but actually uses them so successfully and feathers them in. And it gives that story, it seems to me, real substance, which is unexpected. It's one of the things that makes some of Hammett's stuff so great. The fact that what I think is best novel, which is probably not Maltese Falcon, is probably The Glass Key, is because it deals with civic corruption. And here you get that aspect of it. So, but of course, in the movie, no, not going to happen. And therefore, if you're going to condense, that's very, but then it's interesting because what you're saying, Matt, of course, is so interesting in the way that by completely, well, almost completely rewriting the last part of the story for the film, it's interesting how you, in fact, move to, shall we say, a more traditional, almost domestic, almost more soft-boiled mystery approach, in the sense that it's the rich house on the, you know, the lovely beach house, and everything is revealed there, and it's this love nest, and they go there and they go away and they come back, and it's all about the family. So by having changed Anne's role within that, you then big up the role of the father as well. You know, Mr. Grail, who is rich and powerful and important, but actually is a nothing figure in the novel. And in the film, he becomes a useful Deus Ex Machina for plot purposes. You know, I don't know how convincing that is actually, but you can argue all of a sudden it's a bit more, you suddenly feel you're on very familiar footing in terms of how you're going to resolve it. It totally works. And then Moose comes in, you know, and that aspect of it. And, you know, but I think it's fantastic. But it's interesting how to resolve it because of all the things you've taken out. It's interesting what they go back to make it work. Yeah, you know, what's the kind of the generic sort of code that they're reaching for? I find that fascinating.
I agree. I mean, it is quite interesting how changing one character has this incredible effect on the whole narrative. I'm torn because while I love the film and I love what it does, and I think it all works, I'm still maybe there's a mild disappointment that they changed Anne's role and background as much as they did. I think to me, she comes across as Lois Lane. So whether she's connected to the Grails or not connected to the Grails, that doesn't matter because she's going for it, and that works for me. Now, I maybe if the film had kept the concept of her being a journalist, that would have retained some interest and gave her a little bit more. She doesn't have I mean, she does have and she has a strong presence in the film, but she is just sort of wandering around in the film. Whereas if she had just a little bit something extra to her, I would have liked that. So I feel like, because again, this is where it's like, okay, you've got this in the novel, you got this cool independent woman who is a journalist who is going after people. I love it. And then in the film, it's stripped away. It's like, oh, she's just a girl with daddy issues. All right, maybe that's an oversimplification a little bit, but it works for comedy. But
in that case, surely this is where we have to talk about the Falcon takes over. In that case,
yes.
How familiar are you guys with the first ever adaptation of the Raymond Chandler novel?
Vaguely, I know that it exists, and I know that I know that the Farewell My Lovely was first adapted for the Falcon Takes Over, and that's about as far as I've gone with it.
Yeah, I've seen it a couple of times. I won't say I'm an expert on it, but I remember watching. Again, it was one of those that was shown by the BBC at Sunday weekday evenings, along with things like The Saint, the George Sanders Saint films and the Rathbone Holmes films and the Mr. Moto films. The Falcon was one of those. I'd never heard of it before then and heard so little of it since. But like Luke, I know it's an adaptation. And if I remember rightly, Sergio, it's not an unfaithful adaptation. It's just
it's remarkably faithful.
It's just a little bit watered down.
I mean, yes. I mean, this is the thing, right? We talk about how they condense.
I think we should say the Falcon is no Philip Marlowe, is he? The Falcon is not.
He is not. He's. You know what? It's. There's one book which sort of compares the way that George Sanders plays the Falcon, and you keep thinking, if they'd made James Bond 20 years earlier, that's kind of the way you would have played it, because he's this kind of louche playboy character, catnip to all the ladies, gets in all kinds of scrapes and gets out of it just fine at the end. In the 1942 The Falcon Takes Over, which was a pre-established series but was in fact an attempt by RKO to make up for the fact that Leslie Charteris got so annoyed about the way that they adapted The Saint for the movies, because of course he was then famously just as grumpy about the TV version with Roger Moore. He was just like that. Yes, Leslie, they weren't just like the books. So he got so cross that eventually they had to stop making them. And what they did was, the cunning people at RKO, they found another character called the Falcon, created by this writer called Michael Arlen, who wrote actually quite interesting stuff in the 1920s, including books that got banned. But this was just a short story. There was no plot to speak of with this character in it. And they paid him twice what they paid Chandler for his novel rights, just to have the character play the Falcon, which is basically the Saint. And in fact, there was a lawsuit and they had to sort of pay Charteris off yet again. But eventually the Falcon series really extended itself to a remarkably long series of films. And what happened is that by this point, George Sanders was getting a bit bored, and he did a few of these, but they sort of said, do one more and we'll get your brother, the actor Tom Conway, to play the Falcon's brother. So if you do one movie called The Falcon's Brother, we'll have you die, spoiler, and he can just take over the family business, which is exactly what happened. He went on to play it for another 12 movies or something. So anyway, when they made, and these are, he's a debonair man about town. So what's amusing is that The Falcon Takes Over is set in New York, for starters, and it's all high society, mostly. So Florian's is now this very shishi club, of course, ritzy. And the reason why Moose can't get in is not because he's white, because he's not wearing white tie and tails. That's why he can't get into the club. It's that kind of difference. On the other hand, weirdly, basically the entire plot is there. All the characters there. And Anne Riordan is in fact played by the lovely Lynn Barry. Made lots of terrific Universal horror films, and she was a great pin-up in the 40s. Rabid Republican, but lovely screen presence, and she is exactly the character from the book. She's this go-getting gal who wants to get a scoop, wants to get a story, and occasionally she gets outwitted by the Falcon, but ultimately gets her story, and she's, so on and so forth. So if you want to see that version of the character, because you're not going to get it in the Mitchum one either, where they completely remove her, that's the only place to get it. And so it's worth seeing just for that. In actual fact, the reason these particular films always turned up on the BBC is this is from my own previous life working in film and education and in rights and so on. The BBC owns the RKO library for television broadcasting purposes.
Right.
So which is why a lot of RKO films like Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire, The Falcon, The Saint, all these kinds of things, and of course Notorious and Murder My Sweet, Crossfire, the title of which I couldn't remember before, all turn up so regularly, and which are all very likely to be on iPlayer as a result. That's why.
Well, this was on iPlayer. I mean,
there you go. And it'll probably always be there, because I think that, like I say, they own them outright.
Right. I didn't know that. There you
go. Bit of trivia for you.
Learn something new every day.
Yes, my copy of Murder My Sweet is a German copy. It was the only copy I could find. It's I bought it on Blu-ray, and it was the only
the Warner Brothers one.
So it's the only one I could find.
You got to get it. It's it was one of the HMV exclusives for a long time. You would get it from that, which means you can probably get it for about $15.99 or less. It looks incredible. The Blu-ray of Murder My Sweet is wonderful.
I'll have to check that out, because I think I don't know if that was out at the time that I bought that initially.
Probably not. I actually got mine
never
from the
looked again.
States.
So
yeah, I got mine from the States because Warner's release is always region free, but it has been released here. So if you can't get it at HMV, you can get it at what is now the Warner Brothers UK store. The Blu-ray is a thing of quite extraordinary beauty. It looks like it's brand new.
Yeah,
I'll get that, because I think it's a German Japanese.
Blu-ray.
Really?
Say again?
My copy's Japanese.
Malo-san.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah.
Weird. I mean, my copy is a Blu-ray though, so I don't know if that's going to be any different. It's a German Blu-ray, but it's German for whatever reason. So I don't know if it's any different than the other one.
It may not be. It depends if it's a Warner's one or if it was licensed by somebody else.
I'll check.
But not to diminish the value of your Blu-rays, guys, but you should get the Warner's one. It's got a commentary on it by Alan Silver, by the way.
Oh, cool. Yeah, mine has
Silver
no special features, which is a disappointment.
Yeah, mine has no special features. You'll be surprised to learn.
Yeah. Should we just take a brief pause and sort of go behind the camera to talk a little bit about the director and writer and things like that before we dive into what we think of the cast in more detail? Because we normally would do that, but we've been on a very lovely tangent about the novel that's I love. So anyway, the film released December 1944, was a huge hit, made a bunch of money. The director, Edward Dmytryk, not Dmytryk. How are we pronouncing his surname? My dyslexic brain cannot do this.
Edward Dmytryk, yeah.
Dmytryk, okay, there we go. Dmytryk. So he's an interesting fella. He was mostly doing B movies. Started out as an editor for Paramount, then went to RKO, directed some B stuff, 7 Miles from Alcatraz, Hitler's Children, which Hitler's Children in 1943 was a hit. It was a sleeper hit, but it was a hit.
Huge hit.
Yes.
Huge hit, yeah.
But it didn't skyrocket his career. He sort of maintained and continued to do B-ish movies.
No, I disagree. I think Murder My Sweet isn't that long after. I think that's what pushed him into A movies, basically.
Yes. Well, he did a couple of B movies in between Hitler's Children and Murder My Sweet. So I'm assuming Hitler's Children got him there, but there were a couple in between, if I'm not mistaken.
He did a Falcon film. He did a Falcon Strikes Back in the same year.
But the thing is that those used to take 2 weeks to shoot, you know.
Yeah.
But we still did them.
Literally. No, I mean, I think pre-production on Murder My Sweet went on a little longer than that, but he was there right from the beginning.
Yeah. So then he comes back with Murder My Sweet, and I mean, he goes on to have a bunch of it. We mentioned Crossfire, Caine Mutiny, The Young Lions.
Caine Mutiny is one of my favorite films.
Yes.
He's terrific. Yeah. And if you
haven't
seen
The Affair,
say again.
He did The End of the Affair with I think it's Van Johnson, but it's certainly Peter Cushing as the cuckolded husband, and that's a
very
wonderful
odd film. Well, it's I prefer the book.
Well,
they couldn't do the book, could they? You know,
they couldn't do the book though. We're back on this territory, Sergio. They couldn't do the book.
No. By the way, if you haven't seen it, Dmytryk with this film basically is one of the genuine inventors of film noir. And he deserves that credit, you know, because visually this film is very important, and he was the one getting that done. I mean, it's shot by one of the great cameramen of the studio era, Harry J. Wild, who was called in by Wells to do all kinds of reshooting on both Citizen Kane and specifically Magnificent Ambersons, in even more so. But this is one of those people who worked forever until he just dropped dead. And in fact, he's one of those people who had a good relationship with Dick Powell. And in fact, his death is sort of linked to the fact, I suspect, that like all those people who worked on Dick Powell's film The Conqueror, which was shot in Utah in 1955-56, they shot it on an area that had been used for nuclear tests. And so people like Dick Powell, John Wayne, Agnes Moorehead, Harry Wild, Susan Hayward all died of cancer.
Jeez.
And basically that's the story. It's kind of like, well, yeah, they've been blowing, nuclear bombs on there for ages. And so anyway, and Wilde is one of those casualties. He died young. He died in 1961, and he never stopped working. I mean, he's got an incredible filmography. Looks amazing, but it's just one of the many films he was doing. And what's interesting about Dmytryk, though, is if you haven't seen it, there's a film of his called Mirage from 1965, which is a terrific movie, kind of amnesia.
Gregory Peck.
Gregory Peck and Diane Baker and Walter Matthau, and written by Peter Stone, sort of halfway between doing charade and arabesque for Stanley Donen, and he's sort of doing it in between. And I think Gregory Peck wanted him to get quips and funny lines just like those. And funnily enough, Gregory Peck isn't, of course, that kind of actor. But Dmytryk had this terrific career in lots of ways and made lots of really, really interesting films until he retired in 1975. But I was going to say, Luke, you're going to mention the little bump on the road.
I think we probably should.
Yes, he was one of the Hollywood 10.
Yes. And
one of those people who took the fifth and refused to name names in front of the McCarthy Commission's House Committee on Un-American Activities, and eventually spent 6 months in jail, came out and couldn't face not having a career. So in fact, he ended up despite having done the jail time, he in fact named names and got his Hollywood career back and made a whole bunch of big budget, very decent films. The Sniper, for instance, is a terrific noir film. He did, all kinds of films that are well worthy of respect, and others that are a bit crap. But he had a very decent Hollywood career, and it's just, he's one of those people who I think people tended to feel a little frustrated about, because obviously he is someone who initially stuck to his guns. And like the producer of this film, Adrian Scott, whose life was completely ruined by the McCarthy witch hunt and never got his career back. But he ultimately sort of said, you know what, I don't believe in this in the same way I did. People thought he was, perhaps not entirely sincere or what have you. But like I say, he went to jail. He did the time. So I don't know. He also made some films in the UK as a result. One of those people who worked in Europe for a bit before going back to Hollywood.
Yeah. It's a murky time. It was a murky time back then.
And like now, yeah.
So yeah, John Paxton, the writer of the film, definitely need to mention him as well. He wrote Crossfire. He obviously wrote Murder My Sweet. He worked with Dmytryk quite a bit. He received the Mystery Writers of America Best Motion Picture Screenplay Award for Murder My Sweet and for Crossfire. So, looking at his filmography, those are the only films I really know of his. I'm not well versed in his other work. I don't know if you guys are.
He did all kinds of interesting stuff, but not necessarily in this genre.
Yes,
I was going to say he did lots of things, but he was primarily. I think he started off, of course, as a playwright. He was a New York playwright who then sort of went Hollywood, and I think he was brought in by Adrian Scott, because I think Scott was also a theatre person before he went to Hollywood. Paxton did. You might need to correct me on this, but did he write Koch, the Walter Matthau film? Yes, which is Jack Lemmon's directorial debut, and which is a wonderful film, not politically correct, but in the best possible way. It's a film that doesn't get revived, but I love it. I just love that movie. So just for that, he gets to go in the pantheon of the greats. And again, they're completely different. It's Walter Matthau playing this old codger. And he's wonderful in it. I mean, it's just a great movie. So, and Paxton also did stuff for TV. He had a very interesting career, I think.
Yes. Rightio. Okay, so a little bit on the kind of production history of this thing. So earlier you mentioned that the chap who wrote The Falcon was paid twice the amount that Chandler was. So Chandler, I'm assuming with this, if my sources are correct, RKO paid $2,000 for the rights to Farewell My Lovely. So that means this guy got $4,000 for a short story. He got $5,000 for a short story. Oh, that is too funny. Now, we've already talked about The Falcon Takes Over, but it's interesting to note that this film with Dick Powell is the first. Murder My Sweet is the first proper time Philip Marlowe is on the big screen. And it fascinates me because this is obviously not the first adaptation of a Chandler novel, but it's the first Marlowe that's out there. That is, in my opinion, feels overshadowed entirely by Bogart and Bacall. And frankly, I feel like this should overshadow Bogart and Bacall.
Yeah, I was going to say at the outset, but I thought I'd hold my tongue. This is streets ahead of The Big Sleep for me. I think this is a much better adaptation of Chandler's work. I think we said in our episode, I think, Luke, all those moons ago, that the Big Sleep really is a Bogart and Bacall vehicle before it's a Chandler vehicle. And I think it's obvious and it shows. And whereas this is the opposite. I think this is it's not as polished, but again, I think that's to its favor rather than its detriment. Because the Big Sleep to me is a bit sort of studio gloss, whereas this is a bit more down and dirty like Chandler should be. I think this is easily tops The Big Sleep for me. And dare I say, Powell tops Bogart for me as Marlowe.
We can discuss that.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I don't know about you, but one of my favorite shots from Murder My Sweet is that it's a complete throwaway. It's that bit when he's lighting a cigarette and he's got that little cherubim statue.
Yeah, I love that.
And he lights the match on his ass and lights a cigarette, and it's this little throwaway moment, and it's just, you never did that, Bogey.
No.
I think so. He just wins for that. But the reality is just that from my point of view, you always get that quote from one of Chandler's letters where he sort of says Bogart, just has to enter a room to dominate it. And that's true. He doesn't need a gun. And I think he was, he thought he was good in the film. He thought he was good in the role. But what we have to remember is that the actor that Chandler really wanted overall just to play Marlowe was Cary Grant. Now, he never got Cary Grant, and you just think, but actually Cary Grant in kind of Notorious mode, would have
Yes.
been
In notorious mode,
fantastic.
definitely.
100%.
And
Absolutely.
Dick Powell is so much closer to that than Bogart or either
Yes.
Robert or George Montgomery, and so I think yes, in actual fact you're getting that much closer to what the author envisaged. Sure, he got the handsomest leading man in the whole of Hollywood to play his role. Why not? But also, I think that what's intriguing about it is that this is, and I think this is Dmytryk's feeling about the character, is that the hardness, the hard-boiled aspect to Marlowe is it goes only so deep, because he does have he has quite a sensitivity on the inside, and certainly if you read the books, that's quite clearly there. In fact, there are books that suggest that actually he's almost too sensitive. He must be closeted and gay, and so on. Although he has girlfriends in several of the books, so what have you? It could be true. Doesn't matter. Either way, he's still a great character, obviously. But it seems to me that that's the right approach, because I love when Powell gets a bit flustered, usually when he's being strangled by Moose Malloy, but the way he does it, he's also, will you stop doing that? And the way he's doing it, he's not just, because Bogart never loses his cool. Powell totally loses his cool several times. And obviously, we've got to talk about it, but the big expressionistic set piece when he gets spirited away by Amthor and he gets pumped full of drugs. He's brilliant in that sequence, and the ones that follow, the entire of that, when he's just completely out of it. I think he's marvelous in it, absolutely marvelous.
Yeah, when he's raving, he said, when a man's got a gun in his hand, people are meant to do what he says and all that business. Straight out of the book.
And he's so great.
Brilliant at that. Yeah, brilliant at that. And the bit earlier when he's talking to the cop and he says, all right, it sounds screwy. Maybe it is screwy, but it's all I know. And he's getting frustrated then as well. And he's just a bloke. He's not like a screen legend. He's a bloke doing a job that sometimes doesn't go his way. And Powell's brilliant at bringing that out. Absolutely fabulous at bringing that out. I think it's a great performance, and one that he was hungry for. And I think that always helps when an actor is desperate to do a role so that he could break away from the light comedies and musicals that he was known for. He wanted to do something serious and tough, in inverted commas. When they're anxious to do it and eager to do it and desperate to do it, for want of a better word, they really do dig deep and deliver. And I think, and this is an example of it. This is an example, because it was surprise casting. It's the sort of Michael Keaton of its day. Or the Daniel Craig of its day. Perhaps that's a better analogy. And people, I think people were a bit sort of standoffish about it, but my God, he delivers. He delivers.
Well, he wasn't the first choice, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, certainly Dmytryk didn't want him. Dmytryk was horrified, wasn't
he? They wanted John Garfield, which is very interesting, very different. But he was working at RKO at the time. And you can see why. And that would have been really interesting, just because, but it's much more intense kind of actor, of course. But in actual fact, I think, Powell I think he's perfect. I don't think there is a better on-screen Marlowe. And I like most of them. I even think George Montgomery's okay. Yeah, frankly, you guys just did an episode on the Powers Booth series. You did the pencil, didn't you? Yeah. And as a show, it has its own oddnesses. And Anne Riordan turns up in it, although she's, of course, in a slightly different mold. But there are no obvious bad actors who have ever played the role. I think even Elliot Gould is doing his own version. I mean, I love that film. It's a million miles away from some aspects of Chandler, but I think it's fantastic. Fantastic movie. Even James Garner's.
Garner, I was just going to say.
I mean, it is a bit of a dry run for Rockford. It's true. He has a slightly different personality, and he's got a suntan. It's kind of things like that.
He's James Garner.
Yeah,
but he's James Garner as James Garner.
but he's good in it, and it's not a good movie just because it's got Bruce Lee in it. It's a good movie. Yeah.
I like that film. Yeah, I like that film.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Mitchum. In Farewell, My Lovely, I think he's cruising on the gin. I think in The Big Sleep. Although I agree with what you said earlier, Sergio, that as an adaptation, it's far more faithful than the Bogart version. But I think Mitchum is at his best in Farewell, My Lovely, and he's a close second for me to Dick Powell, who is my favourite.
The only issue is the age, which is just a real shame, because you think that the reason they got rid of Van Ryden is just because he's too old for it. He's literally twice the age of Charlotte Rampling. She was 29, he was 58. That kind of twice the age. That
kind of thing, yeah.
And so but that's okay because of the way that the role comes out, and because you feel like he doesn't entirely mean it. And that's okay because she's married to someone even older. Because of course in that version she's married to Jim Thompson.
Jim Thompson, of all people.
How insane is that? So I love that.
These days they call that an Easter egg, I believe.
But I agree with you both. I think Dick Powell for me is the best on-screen Marlowe thus far. The idea that you could sort of redo it and do it in period and be much more faithful to the books is very intriguing, and one would have to look perhaps at what HBO recently did with the early Perry Mason books, with Matthew Rhys, to suggest, well, it's doable, it's not impossible. But I hate to say it out loud because I'm such a fan, but you worry a little bit about what would be the point a little bit, because you just sort of think, well, it's just such a long time ago. So it's not that it's not potentially timeless. You'd have to focus on those bigger themes. I mean, it's like, The Big Sleep, possibly the actual plot itself isn't quite as well done as Farewell, My Lovely. In some regards, though, in some ways, I prefer it as a novel, partly because of the character. You always get these side characterizations in Chandler, so that in Farewell, My Lovely, it's the guy who works at the hotel opposite Florian's, right? And you get this great dialogue. You get a bit of that in the Mitchum, but it's a great scene in the book. And again, what you're alluding to, look, he's an older African American character who gets a nice long scene in the book. This stuff's important, and you don't get it in the Powell. And it's the equivalent of, say, the old father figure in The Big Sleep, for instance. The General Sternwood. And again, those aspects of it work so well and can be done so badly. If you just watch the equivalent in the Robert Mitchum version, it's unbelievably boring. But it's got real poetry to it. It's got great pathos, and it's very poignant. And you could bring all those values to it by getting really good actors and really spending the time. But you'd have to make sure that people understood that this is a character piece first, and not so much about the period. I mean, the closest I can think of, in a sense, is if you think about something like Chinatown, which of course now is a complete period piece. It's over 50 years old, that movie. We're now closer to it, further away from that than it was at the time, from the era it was being retro about at the time. It was only 40 years then, it's 50 now. But because it has substance, because it talks about those very important themes, and therefore that makes it feel like a film that isn't just a private eye movie. It's not just about the plot. It's not just about finding out who done it, although it does give you all of that, which is that's the greatness. You get all the good stuff, but you get all that subtext, which actually is deeply embedded within it. So as long as you could adapt them that way, and you can make the period work for you, that's terrific. But in actual fact, I feel like it's the later books, like The Little Sister and The Long Goodbye, that which are longer, darker, to a certain extent, bleaker, more misanthropic up to a point, although I don't think they're as misanthropic as people make out. They're deeply romantic books. They're great novels. And Anthony Burgess, put The Long Goodbye in his list of the best post-war novels published in English. And that's saying something, because he was putting a lot of not straightforward books in there. He was putting a lot of stuff that was, a bit obscure that everybody was going to read. He was putting Finnegan's Wake in there, which, I don't know how many people read Finnegan's Wake cover to cover, but I don't know many. But he said, no, I'm putting it in that company. And that's sensational. So if you could do someone who was, say, somebody like David Simon or Tom Fontana or somebody like that, who could make, as showrunner, maybe you could really, really bring out the best of that. And absolutely, we don't want Liam Neeson in that. Because that Marlowe film, even with a reference to, the Ark of the Covenant, is an unbelievably shit movie.
Yes. My God.
That's a total aside.
Just a brief. Yeah. Yes. Well, I think we should dive a little bit into Claire Trevor and Anne Shirley as well. Claire Trevor plays Velma Valento, and Anne Shirley plays Anne Grail. I found both of their performances to be wonderful. I love them both in their roles. I've already said my piece about Anne. I wish she had a little bit more. I don't need to recover that ground. But I do think what we get from them is both are two really great performances. Now, I do find it interesting that apparently Anne and Claire wanted to subvert expectations and be cast in each other's roles, which that could have been interesting. Do you think that would have pulled off?
You mean to have the mother be that much younger than the daughter? That would have been a bitter pill.
Yeah. They could have aged her up.
I think you'd lose sympathy for the father, frankly. He's married someone who's 20 years old instead of someone who's in their late 30s.
Is that out of ordinary?
That's over to you, Matt. I'm not commenting.
You started it, Sergio.
No, but when you think about
it's a terrible idea. Right? No, it would never have worked. It would never work. Also, with all due respect, I don't think Anne Shirley's got the chops. Claire Trevor's fantastic actor, and she'd been at it a long time, and whether it's Key Largo or whether it's Stagecoach, she's a fantastic actor who can actually play all kinds of flavors, and she brings a lot to it because she has to play. There's a lot of it that, of course, is subtext here. Because it's clear that you're basically, she was kind of like a prostitute, really, right? So that's that standard thing where you kind of chorus girl is always code for being a sex worker in the 40s. And, but there's that great scene in the beach house where you're mentioning where, of course, she's wearing conceivably Marlowe's trench coat, takes it off. She's just got a slip under there. It's a great moment. She makes the moves on him. Now it's from the book, but she does it and she does it brilliantly. Can Anne Shirley do that? Nah. I just don't think so. She's gorgeous. She's great in it. But actually, weirdly, I think Lynn Barry would actually have been slightly better. You guys have totally got to rewatch The Falcon Takes Over. I'm telling you, man. But Lynn Barry,
I'm gonna make a mission this weekend.
Well, Lynn Barry was of course had this kind of slight kind of sex pot sort of persona a little bit. I mean, she's very cute and terrific actor, and she did these The Wolfman, what have you. She's in those kinds of films. She's all over the place at Universal, working with Lon Chaney Jr. quite often. Apparently, they hated each other. But
everybody hated Lon Chaney Jr., didn't they?
Right? Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, what are you going to do? Alcoholic? Yeah, sad, really. But I think that swapping them over wouldn't have helped things. I think Anne Shirley's very good in it, and as I say, I think that switch in her characterization plays to her strength as a character. And equally, I think Claire Trevor as the kind of evil stepmother, which actually she's having to play just a teensy bit older than she really was. And but I think she's doing it really well. Whereas in fact, when you then compare it with, which is invidious, but you compare it with Charlotte Rampling, all due respect, Charlotte Rampling, She's gorgeous. She looks like Lauren Bacall. She's a bit too young. There's just no getting away from it. She's not mature enough for, this is supposed to be 8 years after she'd have been 20. I mean, maybe, but it doesn't feel right in terms of what the story is trying to tell you about her as a woman with a past. Whereas here you have no,
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Yeah. Also, have you guys seen Born to Kill, aka Lady of Deceit? With Lawrence Turney. Robbie Wise film.
My memory is stiff.
She's like you guys got to rewatch it. She's like the toughest, meanest, cruelest femme fatale in the history of the movies. She's just, oh my God, sex on a stick. But she's fantastic.
You're just giving us a watch list, Sergio.
I'm only a guest here, but I feel I need to share.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, if I pivot my camera, that's I don't know if you can see the shelves, but anyway.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. I going back to the point. I agree. I don't think it would have worked if they'd swapped. Because I think. And for the same reason, really, Sergio, I don't think Anne Shirley's got the nastiness that Velma needs, whereas Claire Trevor is dripping with it when she needs to be. And also, she's apparently helpless when she needs to be, when she says to Marlowe, I need you, to get me out of this. She can do all that, and I'm not sure Anne Shirley could, because Anne Shirley looks too wholesome to me. Whereas Claire Trevor looks like the sort of woman that your mum would say would get you into trouble.
Careful now.
Yes, please.
So, and I also don't think that it necessarily works when you cast against type. So famously, Ingrid Bergman and is it Lana Turner in Spencer Tracy's Jekyll and Hyde? They reversed. So Ingrid Bergman played the chorus girl. And Lana Turner played the chaste daughter of the rich man, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There's no way you believe either of them in those roles. And I think this was suffered in a similar way, to be quite honest. But I do like the bit where they face off against each other, and she says, Anne Shirley says how much she hates men because they're all Lindsay Marriotts, and then she turns around to Claire Trevor and said, you stopped me before I gave the other half of the speech, and it's this: I hate their women as well. And Claire Trevor ends it by saying, "Your slip is showing, darling." So it's a brilliant. I think that's an electric exchange between the two of them. But I'm not sure that Anne Shirley could have maintained that sort of level all the way through. I mean, do you think it would have worked, Luke, if they'd swapped?
I don't know. I think what fascinates me is just the idea of going against type. That's the concept that interests me, rather than maybe seeing it in execution. I quite like that idea, because it clearly means that Claire Trevor was interested in doing something different, in the same way that Dick Powell was very interested in doing something different. And what could this film have looked like if those two were both able to do the different thing at the same time together? Maybe we would have needed to have found a new person for Anne Grail. Maybe you find a new actor for that. Maybe that means, but then that doesn't help Anne out in her quest to do something different either, does it? But I don't know. In execution, I can see why it could be a problem, but I would be interested to jump to that multiverse and see that version of the film to see if it could have worked, because I think there are moments where actors do get cast against type, and it does really work.
Definitely, yeah, it can work, and when it works brilliantly. But
maybe there could have been enough creative energy behind the camera to make Anne step up. Who knows? We'll never know. We'll never know. But I like the idea in concept.
Yeah, I admire the actors who say they want to do something different. They want to break from a perceived perception of who they are. I mean, that Cary Grant is a good example, isn't he? In Notorious, I mean, he's great in that. But that's a long way from Bringing Up Baby, and films of that ilk. And Dick Powell, I mean, he's another example. This is a long way from the song and dance routines. So when it works, it can work brilliantly. Whether these two are an example of it. I don't know. I have my doubts.
Yeah. So as we sort of slowly move towards our conclusions, let's go through some likes and dislikes, if there are any on the dislike side. What are some of your kind of your main likes of this film outside of the stuff we've already been going about? Are there any particular scenes or exchanges or something like that really stood out to you about this film that you're like, I gotta bring this one up? We'll start with Sergio.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped in, but there's one thing I just got to get off because it's from that opening exchange. But it's that great bit with the cop. It says, "Hey, it's not personal. We don't like you, but it's not personal." And I just think it's not from the book, and it's such a great line, and I love it. And they keep that up. They keep being mean to Marlowe, who really doesn't deserve it. And but I quite like that aspect of it because he's sort of an outsider. And in a way, what's intriguing to me is that, the way they kind of have the relationship with Anne Riordan in the book, they're both sort of outsiders because they're both trying to be straight in a corrupt world, and while acknowledging the corruption that surrounds them and trying to do something about it. Because the film isn't going to do that, she sort of doesn't quite fit in with the family unit, and she lives apart, and she has her own apartment, and she's pursuing this potential other career. And he, of course, is the knight errant. He's the one he's not really as seedy people make him out to be, and fundamentally he's a good guy. Although I do like the fact that he keeps taking money from all kinds of people to do the job.
Yeah, he
accumulates quite a lot of cash by the end, right? Yeah.
Having just been told that he's a slot machine.
That's right, which is from the book, and
which is from the book, yeah,
and turns up in the Mitchum one as well. And I think that it has. I mean, we should also, I think, say how good Mike Mazurki is.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, it's an odd thing for him because, of course, he's one of these physical actors. He's kind of almost 6'5", basically a very large, hulking kind of guy, had a long career, but in those kinds of roles, let's face it. And you either played a funny version or you played a serious version of that. That's kind of it. And in something like Night in the City, the Jules Dassin version, for instance, he doesn't actually get a lot to do, but he's got a tremendous presence in it, and so you get that essence of it. Here he has an interesting role, and of course there's that kind of sort of simple speech that he uses, because of course Mazurki is actually from the Ukraine, for instance, and I feel sometimes he's kind of channeling almost that foreignness, as if the language is English, or American English is not his first language almost. And so because he doesn't speak quite right, he gets his tenses wrong. Yeah, you think I should, that sort of thing. It's interesting. It's almost like everything for him is slightly in translation. And I find that quite subtle, and I think very well thought out, and deserves a lot of credit, because of course he is this, he's kind of a MacGuffin. He kind of helps things get down. I mean, in fact, that aspect of it is handled very nicely in the 75 remake, where in the novel and in the 44 version, you are hunting to find out where is Velma. In the 75 version, you're really hunting for Moose Malloy. Everybody's looking for him and not finding him. They keep saying, "Where's Moose? Where is he? Where is he?" And they're all looking for him. And it has this interesting, different trajectory, which is a different way of approaching it. But I think Mazurki's terrific. So he deserves some kind of extra special credit, because I think it's one of the best overall roles he got in terms of characterization, in terms of someone who, because his exit, which is the exit of the book, and in fact it's even in the short story, although it's modified but considerably. But this idea that he's sort of lost by it all, he kind of loses Velma and he loses himself. Because I've seen, for instance, aberrant synopses of that film that assume that he's out to get her. Isn't that weird? They don't understand that he's in love with her because she's cute as lace pants, and he just wants her back because he loves her.
Yeah.
I've seen synopses where they sort of say, no, he wants to go and kill her. Isn't that
Doesn't?
interesting? Yeah, I know.
No.
Weird, right?
What? You didn't watch the film?
But so he gets a nice, shall we say, I don't know if it's exactly an arc, but he gets a very interesting role, and he gets lots of good scenes. When he turns up, it's always a highlight. It's a bit like The Third Man. You know, Harry Lime's not in it that much, but when he turns up, it always bumps up the movie. So I wanted to at least make sure we mentioned that aspect of it.
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh no, he's in my likes. I wanted to mention him as well because I think perfect portrayal of Moose. I like Dick Powell is the perfect Chandler. This is the perfect Moose. Topping both of these guys in these roles will be, you know, where however many years later, and it hasn't been done yet. So, you know, there you go. No, I think his performance is wonderful. He played everything. As you're saying earlier, those scenes where like he is choking, where he's like choking Marlowe, and that sort of the move between dumb violence, you know, and sort of childlike qualities. It's a really fantastic performance. You shouldn't hit me. I really wish you wouldn't. You should, you know, the way he just comes across. It's there's so much going on because he could easily have just been big dumb guy, but the performance goes so beyond big dumb guy. There's a humanity to him that is, you know, stretched throughout the story. I think that a different actor would have probably played it, I would say, lesser, but I think he nailed what needed to be nailed for that particular role.
Absolutely, and I think he is big dumb guy really in the 1975 version, isn't he? He's played that way in the 1975 version. Yeah,
although I think that there's a kind of a sweetness. I mean, it's Jack O'Halloran who, of course,
there's a sweetness to it.
Not in the Superman, in the Christopher Reeve Superman.
He's not in. He's not in Superman.
And this was, I think, his first film. And in fact, he was a boxer, and before he was an actor. I know what you mean. Although, again, fundamentally, it is the strength of the character, you know, because of course here they modify the ending. Of course, in the 75 version, at least they have, as it were, the right ending. Who shoots who? And it's that much more crushing for him. Yes. And that's handled quite nicely. I think, you know, you get that last shot where you see the two bodies next to each other at the end of the Mitchum version. You know, not to keep talking about the film we're not talking about, but sorry. But I think it's, but I know what you're getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. I've always liked, and I'm going to talk about the 75 version very quickly as well, because there's a contrast for me in one of the scenes that I've always liked, and that is the Jesse Florian scene, where in this. It's quite funny, you know. Starts with "She had a face like a bucket of mud," which is one of my favorite quotes. Yeah. But in the Mitchum 75 one, it's quite tragic, you know, and she's quite pathetic. And Oscar nominated, certainly. Did she win it? I can't remember. No. But no. It's Sylvia Miles, isn't it? She's absolutely heartbreaking in that when she does the dance routine, and it's just awful, you know, because she's drunk. And but in this one, there's just a hint of comedy to it, and I think it's sort of needed in a way, that sort of lighter touch in this film, because the rest of the film is pretty dark. But I love it when she stands up and she drops something and goes to pick it up, and she just says to him, you know, like, no peeking. Don't go standing on no snakes and all that business, which is all from the book. And I think it's just a nice little cameo performance in a nice little scene that then is played not too differently in terms of what happens in the dialogue, but in a much more tragic way 30 years later. You know, I've always liked that Jesse Florian scene, even in the book. I think it's so well done.
Yeah. Well, it's much more substantial in the book, isn't it? In fact, one of the things about the book, which the film can avoid doing because of the condensing of the narrative, is that there's an element of toing and froing. You know, you go there, you leave, then you come back, and then you leave, and sometimes you come back again. So there's that whole business with the nosy neighbor in the book. You know, that whole business, which is all good, but you realize why you don't have it. You don't really need it to progress the story. And but I agree with you completely. I think making her sort of tragic and sympathetic someone who's just caught up in somebody else's machinations. I think, as played by Sylvia Miles, I think is really, really nicely done, and really works. But
yeah, I get that. I think one of my favorite scenes has to be, we got to mention the drug scene.
Oh yeah.
Is that whole, like, it's very Twilight Zone-y as he's going through those doors, or it's when I was watching it, I was actually thinking Alice in Wonderland. It made me think of Alice in Wonderland for some weird reason. I don't know. It just kind of had similar visuals to that. But I thought that was a wonderful scene, and I love when he wakes up, and he's like, there was a web, and they put this sort of, not an actual web, but they have like a web like filter over the camera that looks like it's probably practical in camera effects. Probably, I don't know.
No, it's not. No,
is it not?
Believe it or not, what they did was they photographed cigarette smoke.
Wow.
They enlarged the photographs, and then it was all done in post-production using an optical printer.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Oh, I loved it. I thought that was such a cool. It was such a cool effect. I mean, the ink blots kind of pool of black. It was also a great effect. But I particularly love that scene where Marlowe was talking to the doctor, and he's like, "I've not shot a man in a week." And while the doctor's talking to him, he's getting a little bit frustrated as his head's hurting a little bit, and the fog starts coming back and getting quite thick and you think he's gonna snap, and then bam, he pulls out of it. And it's all gone. And he's right back, to being tough guy Marlowe. That to me, that whole segment of the film it might be my favorite. I love how that whole bit plays out with the drugs and him rambling in bed and almost about to get beat up. It feels like he's about to get beat up by the guy who's hovering over him while he's rambling in bed. It's like if he makes one wrong move, this guy's gonna smack him in the head, which is not what he needs right now. But I don't know, that for me is one of the highlighted segments of the film is that bit.
Absolutely. And he is rambling with all this talk about the stairs being made of dough and all that business.
Yeah.
And I know what you mean about Alice in Wonderland. I'd not thought about Alice in Wonderland, but I know what you mean, because one of the bits I love in that sequence is where Amthor and Moose are these massive, overbearing representations of themselves, repeating lines from the film, and poses from the film. And he's seeing them as these monsters almost. I think that's a brilliant, hallucinating them as something much more terrible than they are. A great sequence. I 100% agree on that. And I didn't know about the effect.
Oh, right. Okay.
I didn't know that's how they'd done the effect. No.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's Dmytryk talks about it in one of his interviews. Again, it was one of the innovations of the film. Actually, that door image became more popular the following year because it's then used in Spellbound. Which is, but there it's used as kind of the doors opening, meaning his mind is freeing. Well, I was going to ask you both, actually, not to keep going back to the book, but on rereading the book, I found that one of the things that doesn't quite work, and it's been interesting watching how the films square it, is that sequence at Amthor's when it turns out in the book that Moose just happens to be there. And it's a way of keeping the two separate plots connected, but I was never particularly convinced. And it's very interesting to see how the film versions smooth that over, basically, and they do that quite convincingly, actually. Which is quite. Now, obviously, it doesn't come up. Here it's just because you get the scene where he's with Amthor anyway, and they're basically lying and using him, and so he's just one of their henchmen now, which is not how it is in the book. Yeah, but it's nicely handled, and but in the book, it's one of the few things where I'm slightly more critical. It's one of the things where it doesn't quite connect, and yet it's interesting because I think that's, like you say, that sequence when he's talking to the doctor is so, they always basically keep the dialogue straight out of the book. Yeah. Pretty much, and it's very successful because again, it's that great thing, isn't it? It's going, you're supposed to be scared of me. I've got a gun, and they say you're about to collapse. You're not going to make it. And of course, in the 75 version, of course, they do this. That's how you're in the middle of the 70s. All of a sudden, it's completely changed. Amthor, instead of being this kind of, it's played by Otto Kruger in the film, the kind of role he played 1 trillion times, always brilliantly, but always exactly the same. And he's a kind of a fake Swami, isn't he? More or less, fortune teller. And in the 75 version, becomes this kind of madam owner of a bordello, and is sort of the character's melded with that of the doctor who also does the injections and works brilliantly. It's much nastier, of course, but it's brilliant.
With Sylvester Stallone as a punter.
That's right. One of her men, in fact.
Not a punter as such.
Well, in fact, again, depends who you read on this, because I'm not sure how I feel about it. According to some stories, the woman that Stallone is ultimately found in bed with works for her, but you're supposed to think it's actually her bit of stuff on the side. That's why she's so angry.
Oh,
because you're supposed to think she's gay. Interesting. There you go.
There you go.
Enjoy that at your leisure. I
can buy that more than I can buy that Moose wants to kill Velma.
He just wants to take care of her forever and ever.
Yeah, absolutely. I can buy the Amthor thing more than that.
Yes. Yeah. No. Very true. Very true. All right. Dislikes. Do we have any dislikes? I have two that are probably quite small, but I do have a couple. But do you guys have any before I share mine, Matt?
I'm not sure I have any that, really to its detriment.
Yeah, it's fine.
Not real dislikes.
Okay.
No, me neither. I mean, I think it's like, do I need to have so much Miles Mander in the film? He's kind of playing exactly the same role he plays in the Sherlock Holmes movies, but it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. It looks great. The soundtrack's good. It visually, it's always quite striking. They go to a lot of trouble to also have good transition scenes from one scene to the next. It's always the sign of a film where they've really thought things through, where you have clever or amusing or unexpected movements from one scene to the next. It's not just they figured it out afterwards. No, they shot it this way. It was all in the script. And so I don't think there's I think if there's one thing I would say I dislike a little bit is on rewatching. It was that thing I was mentioning, the kind of going back business. I think having to go to the beach house, leave, and go back again. Yeah, I find a little. You can see why it happens. They couldn't find another way to square it. I get it, but it always feels a little sluggish. It's kind of like I already had quite a big scene here, and now I'm going to have another one. And you sort of think, okay, but it's not a major thing at all. And also, I want that house. I want to live there. Damn it!
It's a nice house. It's a very nice house.
Sadly, it exists at the Sony lot.
Yeah. So my two small gripes. One we've mentioned, and that is Mr. Grail shooting Velma while he's just sort of in the middle of trying to sit down. The film is so good that I don't know why that is in there in that way. It just, I don't get it. It's a little bit silly. It is what it is, but it pulls me out. It's just like this soul guy, like almost like he accidentally shot the gun. It's like, okay, it's a mildly anticlimactic moment because it's just an old man sitting in a chair. All right, sure. The only other one that I found that I think that I didn't like is it does have the same. I'll use the word problem. It does have the same problem as the Big Sleep, the Bogart Big Sleep, and that is it does want that happy Hollywood ending. And I like my Chandler's. I like my Chandler's dark. He doesn't have happy endings. God damn it! So the kind of romantic ending with him and Anne and the kiss and the stuff. It's fun. It works. I don't it's something that I wouldn't say that I hate or anything like that, but it's one of those things where it's like, this is because they need a happy Hollywood ending. I prefer the Chandler ending, like I did with The Big Sleep. I prefer the darker ending here with Farewell My Lovely. But, you know, are these big things? No, they're not big things. I would say there's small things that just sort of like, I would have preferred a change here or a change.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I would argue
Hollywood's going to Hollywood.
Yeah, but also Marlowe and Anne are in the scene together in their last scene together in the book. You know, so it's not that different. What you then find out is what happened afterwards. It doesn't work. They're never going to use it in an adaptation. You know, the actual ending of the book is sort of interesting, but again, it's all off stage. Why would you do it that way? It's never going to happen, you know, especially in a first-person narrative. You know, it definitely doesn't really work. Whereas, you know, in the last scene, they are together. You know, they're in her apartment, I think. But you know, in the end, I mean, sure, it would have been fun if you'd actually snogged Nolte in the car at the end. That would have been amusing. That would be unexpected.
That would have definitely been unexpected. But yeah, other than that, you know, these are small. These are small gripes. Are there any other bits that we want to mention before we rate the film?
Not from me.
No, not me either.
There we go. Well, as everyone knows, or if you're listening for this time, we rate all of our films out of 5 Falcons, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. We'll start with you, Sergio. What would you rate Murder My Sweet out of 5 Falcons?
It's 5 Falcons, and in fact, I would say 5 Falcons, and it's and I wouldn't have it any other way. And I don't think I want to talk to people who want to give it 5. It's just that good. So it's a great film. It deserves all 5.
So be careful with your rating, Matt.
Okay, I didn't really.
I'll just erase it. Hang on, I'll just erase it. Not 1. No. No, I agree. It was always going to be a 5 for me. I think this is head and shoulders above The Big Sleep. I think Powell is my idea of Marlowe. I agree with you, Luke. He's pretty much on the nose. The noir elements to it, the lights, the shade, the dialogue, Claire Trevor's wickedness at the end. It's all there for me, and I can't give it any less than 5. Brilliant film. Highly recommended to anyone who's not seen it.
Well, it's 5 for me as well. You know, this is a wonderful film. It's a classic. You know, there we go. And also, we need to make sure we keep our friendship with Sergio. So,
well, case solved.
Can't give it a 3.
Yeah.
No. This is a fantastic film. Highly recommended. You know, like I said, the first time I watched it, it became the ultimate Marlowe adaptation for me. So there we go. Yeah. Sergio, where can people find you on the internet?
If you Google Tipping My Fedora, or if you go onto Blue Sky on Tipping My Fedora, you will find me. You won't find me on Twitter, as I insist on calling it, because it's a moral cesspit. And so you will find my old blog where I still put notes about the podcast, which is Tipping My Fedora, which is a WordPress blog. Otherwise, the podcast itself is available from all podcast places, including YouTube, and it comes out fortnightly. So yeah, that's pretty much me. Oh, and yes, eventually I will be publishing my Encyclopedia of Film Noir, which I was hoping would be out this year. It's not. It'll probably be out at the end of next year. But what the hey? There are podcasts of mine saying, oh, yeah, it'll be out at the end of 2025. Total fabrication. Not true. But I'm working on it, you know.
Fair enough. We look forward to reading it and adding it to our collection of film noir books. Do you want to mention what's on your shirt?
I do. Okay, so I'm wearing a t-shirt from the Film Noir UK Festival. Film Noir UK is a group that I'm on the advisory board of, and they organise screenings and events, and they're part of Southwest Silence. Every year now, they started last year, so this year is going to be the second one. They have a festival, and it's in Weston-super-Mare, and it's a weekend of film noir, and they show usually something like 25 films. They're running in parallel across 2 screens. They have international noir. They have classic Hollywood, British noir. This year, the theme is going to be heist. So there's going to be films like Kubrick's The Killing, for instance, is going to be there. You'll get to see that in 4K. Ooh. And there's also an entire season, the first of a 2-part season, which I've been working on. The first half is devoted to Ida Lupino, and the first half is going to be her as a noir actor. So you're going to get films like High Sierra, On Dangerous Ground, and about another 5 others. And then next year for Film Noir Festival 2026, there will be films about her as a writer, producer, director, so working behind the camera. And it's this year's festival is going to be in Weston-super-Mare between Friday, the 31st of October, to Sunday, the 2nd of November. And you should get a ticket. It's not expensive. You can get a pass for the entire weekend for 75 quid, which is really cheap. And it's a great way to meet all kinds of film noir enthusiasts, but also to see some amazing films in really good quality. And apart from anything else, a lot of them they also will have a reasonable number of international films. So again, not just the ones you've seen before, and not just the ones that are available for streaming or on home video. A lot of these, this is a great opportunity to actually just be able to see these films, but also to see them under really good conditions. So I would urge anyone to go there, especially you two.
Yes, we hope to be there, and
we hope to be there.
We're recording this on July 1st. This episode is coming out October 23rd. Who knows what the future
see you in a
has
week's time. Yes.
Maybe see you in a week's time. Who knows? But hopefully we will. But yeah, so go follow Tipping My Fedora. Listen to the podcast wherever you listen. It's one of my favorite film noir podcasts out there. I think there are 2, us and you. That's mean. I'm sure there are others. I'm sure they're out there.
I'm sure we're the best.
But yeah, so go follow, go listen, enjoy. But I think for now, I think we've thoroughly investigated Murder My Sweet 1944, 5 Falcons from all of us. But I think we can put it back in the drawer and file that one away. So obviously we'll be back next week with another case. But in the meantime, remember to take care walking down those main streets.